Hello, this is Science News, an edition for those who care not about loud headlines, but about real scientific data, experiments, and the mechanisms behind discoveries. Today, we will talk about 4 directions that, at first glance, seem completely unrelated: space, brain function, the biology of aging, and fundamental physics. Yet all of them are united by one theme: a revision of our basic ideas about how reality is structured. Let's begin with what is happening far beyond the boundaries of the solar system. Until recently, exoplanets were little more than points on graphs for astronomers. We knew their mass, radius, and orbit, but could say almost nothing about their true nature. This situation began to change with the launch of the James Webb Space Telescope. An international team of astronomers led by scientists from the University of Cambridge, with the participation of researchers from NASA and the European Space Agency, published a series of studies in Nature Astronomy and the astrophysical journal Letters devoted to the analysis of the atmospheres of nearby exoplanets. These planets are located at distances of about 30 to 50 light-years from Earth and orbit red dwarf stars, the most common stars in our galaxy. The scientists used the method of transit spectroscopy. When a planet passes in front of its star, part of the starlight travels through the planet's atmosphere. By analyzing which wavelengths are absorbed, it is possible to determine the chemical composition of that atmosphere. This is where a fundamentally important result was obtained. Water vapor, carbon dioxide, and traces of methane were detected in the atmospheres of several super-Earths and mini-Neptunes. Individually, these gases are not signs of life, but their joint presence in certain proportions points to chemical disequilibrium, a state that, under Earth-like conditions, is maintained by biological or active geochemical processes. The researchers emphasize that this is not evidence of life, but evidence that these planetary atmospheres are active, complex, and dynamic. The key point here is not any specific planet, but the fact itself. For the first time, we have moved from theoretical models to direct measurements of exoplanet atmospheres. In the coming years, with the launch of the Ariel mission and the commissioning of the extremely large telescope, astronomers will be able to compare dozens of worlds by their chemistry, temperature, and geological activity. In effect, an era of comparative planetology beyond the solar system is beginning. Now let's turn to what is happening inside us. For a long time, sleep was considered a period during which the brain merely consolidates information acquired while awake. New research shows that this view is too simplistic. The study was conducted by neurobiologists from the Weizmann Institute in Israel, together with colleagues from the University of Zurich, and published in Nature Neuroscience. The scientists were interested in a fundamental question: can the brain form new associations while a person is in deep sleep without the involvement of consciousness? Participants were connected to electroencephalography equipment, and researchers waited until they entered the slow-wave phase of sleep. At that moment, combinations of stimuli were presented to them, sounds synchronized with the delivery of odors. Some odors were neutral, while others were sharply unpleasant. The participants did not wake up and were not aware of what was happening. After awakening, the researchers tested the body's reactions to the sounds alone, without any odors. It turned out that breathing patterns, brain activity, and autonomic responses changed as if the brain had formed a stable association between the sound and the odor. This means that even in a state of deep sleep, the brain is capable of forming new associative connections. It is important to understand the limitations. This is not about complex learning or acquiring explicit knowledge. Rather, the brain is working with sensory and emotional patterns, the very mechanisms that underlie habits, fears, and automatic reactions. The authors emphasize that this opens new possibilities for the treatment of anxiety disorders and post-traumatic stress through gentle restructuring of associations rather than suppression of symptoms. Sleep turns out not to be a pause in brain activity, but an alternative mode of learning governed by different rules. We now move on to the topic of aging, where a serious conceptual shift has occurred in recent years. The study was carried out by scientists from the Max Planck Institute for Biology of Aging, together with colleagues from the University of California, San Diego, and published in the journal Metabolism. The focus was on the mTOR signaling pathway, one of the key regulators of cell growth and metabolism. In a young organism, mTOR is essential. It signals to cells that resources are sufficient and that they can actively grow and divide. However, the researchers showed that with age, this mechanism begins to work against the organism. mTOR remains chronically active even when the cell's energetic state deteriorates. A conflict arises. The cell receives a command to grow, but lacks the resources to perform this task properly. As a result, damaged proteins accumulate, mitochondrial function is disrupted, and chronic inflammation intensifies, a key factor of aging. Using genetically modified mice, the scientists were able to precisely regulate mTOR activity in specific tissues. With moderate and temporary reduction of pathway activity, the animals lived longer and retained better physical and metabolic function in old age. The key conclusion of the study is that aging is not only wear and tear, but also a regulatory error, a situation in which growth mechanisms continue to operate where a conservation mode is required. We conclude this episode with fundamental physics. Physicists from CERN and Brookhaven National Laboratory have published new data on the behavior of matter under extreme conditions. The subject is quark-gluon plasma, a state of matter that existed during the first microseconds after the Big Bang. Previously, it was believed that its formation required collisions of heavy ions and large volumes of matter. However, experiments at the Large Hadron Collider have shown that signs of collective behavior arise even in proton-proton collisions. Particles begin to move coherently, like elements of a fluid, rather than as independent objects. This challenges previous ideas about the conditions required for the emergence of collective quantum effects. In effect, physicists are observing how complex properties of matter arise from simple interactions. And this is directly related to the question of how reality is structured at the most fundamental level. All the news in this episode is united by one idea. The world turns out to be more complex and deeper than our simplified models suggest. The brain learns during sleep. Aging is linked to errors in growth regulation. Matter exhibits collective properties where we did not expect them, and the search for life is moving beyond the boundaries of the solar system. This was Science News. If you appreciate this kind of format, without simplifications and without noise, subscribe. See you in the next episode.